Okay, so today let's talk about inventory management. So inventory transactions, storing inventory, moving inventory, issuing items of inventory to a job, and also, returning excess materials and parts from a job back into inventory if, for example, you bought too many. So let's first start off with, so inventory falls under material management within Epicor. So again, under the menu structure here on the left, you go to material management, you go to inventory management, and then you have a host of folders here for various items. Let's take a quick look first up. So in the introductory session of our training, as well as the introduction to Epicor, it talks about how to find part numbers and how to search for them. Just a quick recap, there are several tools available. One that I like the best is using the enterprise search option, where you simply type in a description of some sort or part number, and it will return the results for you for everywhere that description or part number or supplier part number may exist. If we're talking about inventory specifically, then you'll be looking at things like part transactions, which are actual movements of parts or parts being ordered or being issued to a job, moving in inventory or being returned or being shipped. So those are all sort of the different types of transactions that a part can undertake within Epicor. And if you're looking specifically for parts or supplier part numbers, then you narrow down on these tags here and to return those results. Just one thing to note, again, online within the Epicor Guides area, there is a new document which I released recently, which is called Epicor Enterprise Search Filter Options. And this gives you enhanced tools to narrow, filter down, or just do an advanced search using the enterprise search. So the way I described was just using a basic search where you put in text, words or letters or numbers, and it will return those details. You can do a specific phrase search by putting it in quotations marks. You can do wildcard searches. You can do or searches. You can explicitly remove things from it. So it must include this, but not that. Date searches, for example, and as well as the tag search, which I talked about. So this is quite a handy document. People like Jared Murray, our CAD manager, uses it quite often because people come to him to find out details for parts, and often he's given very little details, half of the description or a single word, and he can use these tools to narrow down his search to the correct part number. So print it off and put it on your wall if you find that you're searching for parts quite often. It's quite a useful tool. All right, back to the menu. The other tools available are the Advanced Part Search Dashboard, which again allows you to return a list of part numbers based on some filtered criteria, such as a manufacturer part number, supplier part number. You can't use wildcard searches or explicit searches in these fields. So it's a little more restrictive, but it's useful in other ways. For example, I can just leave these all blank, click search, it returns the entire part number database. And then you can right mouse click on the grid here, copy to Excel, and you can go and manipulate or search the data in some way. If you want to do, or if you're more comfortable doing a search that way, you can group it down by only active parts and various other features like quantity bearing. Just a note on quantity bearing, when we talk about inventory, anything that can exist in our inventory as in we store it on the shelf, we count it at stock take time, that item must be quantity bearing, right? So if you're looking specifically for stocked parts, you can go here, you can go quantity bearing true, click search, and it returns all of those part numbers which have the potential to be stocked, but are not necessarily on hand. There is a column here which shows on-hand quantity. So you can see that on-hand quantity across all warehouses within the company. And then again, let's just go with search for an example. And then you can query, for example, show group by on-hand quantity. So we can see that this part number, for example, has an on-hand quantity of 0.1 of a meter. It's 316 round bar, and you can go open with part tracker to query specific inventory information for this part. So you can go to, bins, for example, click retrieve, and you can see that in these warehouses, in these bins, for these lot numbers, it has this on-hand quantity. And you can also retrieve it from a warehouse perspective. But often you want to go find exactly what bin it is if you're issuing it, for example. So this is how you can sort of drill down and query the information. This information is also available in Open with Purchase Advisor. Again, Purchase Advisor is when you're querying purchasing related information to a part, but it does show on-hand quantity here as well. So for the same part, you can see there's on-hand quantity, and then there's in this warehouse that you've highlighted, these bins, these lot numbers, and that quantity on hand. And again, Open with Part Advisor also has a on-hand quantity aspect here as well. So various tools to show you on-hand quantity, but that's effectively an example of if you're searching for a stock part and then finding out whether it has. So you will notice that many do not have an on-hand quantity in here, about 5,500 items in the 0015 part number range that are quantity bearing. So we don't stock everything, but we stock some things. The next one here, material search, is if you want to do a specific search for part numbers or for materials that we keep may or may not keep in stock. We're talking about raw material items. So this dashboard actually filters by a subclass called raw materials, a subclass of parts. So I will just give an example. So this will be quite handy for engineers upstairs. It's quite handy for production engineers downstairs who want to find a specific size material, whether it's in stock or not. If you're doing designs upstairs and you want to design an emergency tool and you want to design it for something that we actually have in stock on the shelf to minimize lead times, this is a very handy dashboard for the engineers to go to find those materials and see what is actually on hand. So here again, so material, if we go 316 and then let's say round, it will return 316 round bar in all various diameters. You can sort these rows. You can look at the lot numbers and you can see what's on hand. So for example, if you're looking for 50 mil 316 round bar, there it is, and we've got 0.64. The little asterisk just means that it's actually 0.64123 or something like that. There's extra digits, but we've just rounded it down to 2 decimal places here. So yeah, there's 1 meter here again of different part number, different lot number. So you can see here, we've got on-hand stock for this size. And then you can, I'll just quickly show you what I mean by the subclass. Subclass 1, raw materials, just here. And so it's critical that when new parts are created, for example, by the part admins, that if it is a raw material, that they set the raw material class, otherwise it won't appear in this dashboard. So the metadata on parts is quite important for searchability and usability for the wider user group. So here again, you can see that part, that material, it is a stocked item considered mechanical, and it has a subclass 1 of raw materials. And here again, you can see the quantity bearing flag is ticked. So that's just a little bit on searching specifically for raw materials. You can also do a lot number search if you have a lot number. So our lot tracked items typically are our raw materials. So aluminium bar, square channel, round bar, all the materials used for machining, things like a C tool and all of that, anything which is tracked. So you can do if you have the lot number or you have the part number, you can do a search for that, and you can see what lot numbers are available here as well. This is mainly useful for the production engineers who do know these lot references, but there again, it is a tool. If you do go out to the shop floor, you have a piece of material, for example, it has a lot number on it, and you want to search, what the part number is, for example. And the inventory dashboard here. So this is a dashboard which shows on-hand inventory. So you just click the refresh button, you select a specific warehouse. So for example, if we're looking in the workshop east, wherever that is, workshop east, which holds things like our fasteners and our raw material shelves. Do a search on that. Then you can, search for a specific part number, or if you know an item is in a specific bin, you can group by the bin. You can see what's in this bin. This bin EA107 has all of these parts and these quantities. So it just allows you to query our inventory database. Another more useful one, often in the bunkers where we hold high valued items, spare hop stabs and, like 4-port hop stabs and things like that. So here again, you can query what we have in the bunker available, filters, specific valves and things like that. So again, inventory dashboard useful for querying what we actually have on hand and where it's located. There are more advanced reports that you could print here, things like slow moving stock and all that. This is more for inventory management, which is sits more on the logistics side of things. So you won't use these typically in your day-to-day in the engineering domain. But one which is useful, PO lines by supplier, for example. You just open up this dashboard here. Supplier name starts with, let's say, Intracut. You can also specify a date range. So you want any purchase order greater than, for example, January 2000, 1st of January 2020. So any which have occurred this year. And this is just a good way that for a given supplier, you can see all that was ordered against this supplier, all the lines that was ordered, and query the details there, how much it costs and things like that. So this is quite useful in that sense. Query things like our fitting suppliers, stainless fasteners, things like that. The other way to do that is, let's have a look, supplier tracker, where if you have a specific supplier and you want to see what POs were raised against the supplier, You know, for example, you're hunting for a specific PO or for a specific part that was ordered at a specific time and trying to find information about that. You go in here, supplier, you search by DAC, let's say, for example. And then you can query things over here. Most of this is just supply related information, purchase point, you know, what's their sales email and things like that. If you are looking for that, what currency they do in and what their terms of service is, 30 days from invoice. You go to links, you can go to purchase orders, you can look at open, closed, or all. You can specify a date range, and you can click retrieve. You can see all purchase orders which have ever been raised since we've been using this system for raising purchase orders against this vendor. You can also check out things like invoices, you know, if they've been paid, if you're doing some vendor management, for example, and payments and things like that. So that's a useful tool there. All right, back onto inventory. So in the tracker section, we've talked about part tracker. Part tracker and part display are quite similar. I find part tracker a little bit more useful. Part display just has less fields, so it's just a quicker, I guess, loading screen if you're just looking at part related information. I'll just show you to that. So it doesn't look at inventory information like the warehouses and bins that part tracker has. I'll just show them next to each other. But it effectively, so you see part tracker has this warehouses and bins area, and it has serial numbers. You can for a given part number, you can retrieve all the serial numbers that were ever created for that part number, and you can see, you know, if they were shipped to or moved, or if they're sitting in inventory at the moment. But when you go to the general tab of part tracker, it's pretty much the same as the part display. So these general tabs under the general tab are the same information. So just two different menus for slightly different purposes. Lot tracker here again. If you know a specific lot number, you type the lot number in here, or part number, to find it. Serial number tracker again. These two, you know, if you're looking for records, and the traceability records are stored against the lot and serial number traditionally. Again, you have a specific serial number. You can type the serial number in, and hopefully whoever's created that serial number has scanned in the documentation, and it should be here in the attachments, and you can retrieve that documentation. Sits with that serial number and travels with that part as it part and serial combination as it travels throughout the system. So that's good for traceability. Time-phased inquiry allows you to throw in a given part number, and you can see whether there's any demand in the system for it at the moment. So let's just see what Epicor has to say about it. To review time-phased material requirements for a specific part or group of parts, so you can review PO suggestions and details from the part tracker. So this is just good, for example, if you know that there's a part right in production right now, and you know, it's mainly used for production engineers to see what the demand is for a part, whether other people are demanding the same part number, for example, from a purchasing perspective or from a job making perspective, but a little less useful from a engineering design perspective. Time phase, job tracker you're familiar with. Again, just if you want to query job specific information, purchase order tracker is available. If you've now found the purchase order number, you want to query that. One thing to note, purchase order tracker, people often ask, how do I see the actual PDF purchase order that was sent to the vendor? If you have a specific PO number, you pull that PO number up. You can view the lines directly within Epicor, or you can go to this print button and then just go to, it defaults to PDF, and just go to preview. I'll just give it a bit, just generating a report. I'll let that run there while we talk about other things, because our test system's a little bit slower. Available to promise, and part transaction history tracker. So this is a good one if for a given part number you want to retrieve all the transactions that has happened against this part. So you can see literally everything that this part has happened. You can see ADJ cost adjustment, ADJ quantity adjustment, and things like that. So these are quite high level, or rather low level or detailed transactional type things, but it's what ERP, finance, and part admins use to query, the journey that a part has been taken. So there'll be other things like receipting to job transactions, inventory movement transactions. You can see what quantity was moved, for example, where it moved from and where it moved to. You can see the quantity that was adjusted here. Quantity 1 was adjusted to make a running total of 3. Whoop. That's the purchase order report. So you can see that's the documents we send out to the vendors. And just continuing with this, you can see quantity of 1 was adjusted to end up in a running total of 3 in this location, in this bin, on this date, right? So that's, you can sort of you can trace the history of a given part and its transactions. So that's a very useful tool there. Now onto the processes for inventory. So one of the most common ones for moving inventory from bin to bin, from warehouse to warehouse, is the inventory transfer. So you just open up this menu. You need to know the part number. It will auto-populate the description. You then need to specify the quantity you're moving. You need to specify the from warehouse and then the to warehouse. So it's fairly simple. From warehouse and bin. So for example, from bunker and whatever the bunker number is, to the East workshop, whatever the bin is, if we're moving location. So it's very important to keep our inventory up to date, because when we do stock takes, we want to reduce the number of variances we have in our stock, and ensure our inventory is accurate, so that when people actually do query it, for example, when they're querying the raw materials, they need to be confident in the system that the parts that are shown on hand within the system are actually there in the quantities specified, because sometimes it does make the difference that if you're missing, half a meter and somebody didn't bother to, do that transaction, it actually is the difference between, a 4-week lead time or a 2-day lead time, right? So it's very important that anytime you move an inventory control part, you do a transaction for it. Issuing material. So this one is used to issue material directly to a job. So if you have material demand on a job, so a job can have operations and materials on it, those materials are required to be fulfilled either from inventory or by being purchased in. If it's being fulfilled from inventory, let's say you've got 10 fasteners that you're required to be issued to a job, you type in your job number, you specify what assembly and what material sequence it is. If that material is not already on the job, you use this button to go and add the material to a job. So let's see whether we can. So that, for example, let's say I'm issuing this specific part number from inventory, then you specify the quantity. This lot number field is highlighted, so you need to specify a lot number. If it is a serial track part, this will be grayed out and this will be highlighted, the serial numbers. You need to specify a serial number that you're moving. Again, this ensures traceability. You can put a reference, such as requested by whoever or whatever the reference may be, the quantity, the bin that you're transferring it from, and then you press OK, and that transaction happens. And then effectively, then within the job, you'll notice that materials sometimes have like a green tick. It means that material has been issued complete, and it means that you've now issued the required quantity in full to the job. And that effectively means what happens in the background is the cost of that material is taken out of our inventory balance sheet, and then put onto that job. So then the costs start accruing on that job for the inventory that you've issued. And just for example, on the other side, when you're purchasing parts, when you've raised a purchase order and the parts come into stores, at the point that they're receipted and issued to the job straight away. If they're not purchased into inventory, for example, and at that point in time, the cost of that purchase hits the job. So while parts are sitting in inventory, while parts are still on order, the costs don't hit the job until the time that you either receipt it or you issue it to the job from inventory. So that's what this transaction does, and that's why it's important to issue your materials to the job. You can issue not just materials, but you can issue a whole assembly. We don't do this often, but it can happen mainly in the production department. There may be a completed assembly that we've done on a prior job. We've decided to store that in inventory. We have a new job to manufacture the same item. The whole assembly is complete, including its subcomponents. They may just issue that whole entire assembly to the job and consider that sub-assembly effectively complete within the job. So that's what issue material, issue assembly, very similar, except one is raw material or specific parts, and others are completed assemblies. Issue miscellaneous material, used much less. It's, for example, used when Brad, for example, does a jig out of aluminium that's needed. He may take some aluminium from the shelf in order to do that. He's not actually booking it specifically to a job, and therefore he will issue the material miscellaneously, and then effectively assigns the cost to our expenses, to our overhead, but not to a specific job. Returning material. So if you've issued material or if you bought material into a job and you need to return it from the job, this is just a reverse process of issuing material. So you need to know the job number, the assembly and material, and you're returning what part number back into inventory. For example, let's say you bought 10. It turned out that the requirement is actually only 5. Right, we've got 5 spare. We're not returning it to the supplier, but we are going to keep it on the shelf. So let's return it back into inventory and keep our records accurate. And therefore, the cost doesn't, the job doesn't get hit with extra costs. And then material is just sitting around, not counted, and no one knows what it's for or where it belongs. So it's important that if there's excess material on the job, you return it back. So that's this menu. And the same as issue assembly. The reverse process is return assembly, and there's also a return process for miscellaneous material. So another example of issuing miscellaneous material, if we take a hot stab from the bunker, for example, and we want to go and take it to a trade show, right? It's important you issue that material miscellaneously, and then when you come back from the trade show, then you return it back. So that way you're keeping the inventory records accurate for the period of time that you've taken it out of inventory. It's actually not in inventory, and if somebody does a stock take on it, you don't want them to adjust it out for no reason, actually do the transaction. So this is all in keeping our transactions accurate. These other tools are more for the job closing process, which I'll go through separately when we talk about job closing. But but effectively, when you close a job, it either gets receipted to another job, or it gets receipted into inventory, or it gets shipped to a sales order. We don't use job receipt to salvage at this point in time. And again, we don't use these mass issues at the moment. Serial number matching or splitting a unit of measure or merging. These are more advanced tools that we haven't had the need to use at the moment. And that is about it from an inventory perspective. Where's my